It's the year ending Sunday the 31st of December 2017, and this is the Year Unwrapped. In the past 12 months, we've seen Donald Trump becoming the 45th President of the United States, Catalonia's attempts to declare independence thwarted, Hurricane Irma striking the Caribbean, and a leak detailing the tax affairs of the rich and powerful. But we're here to bring you some of the trends that passed under the radar this year. Big changes that haven't made headlines, but are slowly altering the way we live. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap 2017. And joining me for this festive This Week special from the digital team, Arion, McNicoll, Rebecca Gillie, Felicity Capon. It's the lineup of dreams. Starting the show this week, it's Arion. What do you think this year will be remembered for?
So, to bastardize Dickens, it was the best of times, though it felt a bit like it was the worst of times.
I used to say this to my staff in the White House, young interns who would come in, any group of young people that I met with, and that is that by just about every measure, America is better and the world is better than it was 50 years ago, 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago. And I know that statement doesn't jibe with the steady stream of bad news and cynicism that we're fed through television and Twitter. But think about it.
President Barack Obama speaking in September. So, Arion, he thinks the world is getting better, and yet Donald Trump succeeded him. Square that circle.
Well, good point, I guess. in one sense, at least, the world did get worse. But I think the point that he's trying to make is that we've been watching this steady stream of what has seemed from time to times like pretty apocalyptic headlines, from Trump to Brexit to disasters on a pretty serious scale.
Not here on the Week Unwrapped. Last week we were talking about the repopulation of the jackal in France. But I guess we're not representative of the media as a whole.
Well, that was one of the stories that wasn't being discussed in the headline, so I suppose that's kind of what he's getting at, that actually behind the information that we're being fed, things actually might be moving in a positive direction. And certain statistics certainly support this. I'll do a quick run-through of a few things that may have got better in 2017.
Okay.
So coal consumption trending downwards.
Coal consumption.
Worldwide.
Yeah, we're using less of that.
Yeah,
okay.
Less coal. 29 countries now recognise same-sex marriage, an extra 4 added this year, Australia among them. I feel a bit sort of patriotic pride on that count. Austria, Malta and Germany being the others.
Necessarily
for your
so.
pub
there
quiz.
were double-digit countries ahead of you, but anyway, yeah.
More children than ever being vaccinated for polio. The percentage of the world's population living in extreme poverty fell below 10%.
Well, that's quite a good one. I can't be cynical about that.
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to stop your list.
Sure.
We'll return to the list.
Okay.
But I'm interested to know particularly what you think about this, Felicity, because you work on the Week Junior. We've spoken before about how you often feel you have to put a slightly positive spin on the week's news for younger readers. Does this tally what Arion's saying with what you find working on a news desk trying to find positivity?
Absolutely not. I think we struggle most weeks to find the good news stories in amongst all the terrible, horrible things that are going on. And it's really important for us to find a mix and a balance of stories that isn't going to put young people off completely. And actually, since we started the Week Junior, since its inception, it has just been amazing how many terror attacks there have been that we have had to find a way of reporting in a way that isn't totally terrifying. And it actually, if anything, working on a children's magazine, you realise how appalling the world really is. So I struggled with this article a little bit, to be honest. It was a difficult one to digest. I think there is good stuff going on in the world. There is positive stuff, but it's very, very, very hard to dispute the fact that a lot of things are just getting worse.
And I suppose the argument, if you're putting a positive spin on the terrible things that Felicity mentions, well, let's take international terrorism for one, is yes, but it's all about context. More people die in car accidents. That's basically the argument, right? It's not saying it's good. It's just saying it gets over-reported.
Exactly. And, you know, in the year that September 11 happened, in 2001, more people died on motorcycles than they did in the terror attack. But it's more captivating to the imagination when terror strikes. And this year, awful as that news has been, comparatively few people died compared with, I'm sure, millions of other metrics or ways that you could measure threats in the UK unfolded. So I do think that there's news that's particularly captivating that again makes us feel as though the world is getting worse, but actually is it?
Rebecca, I want to know what you think, and then I'll let Arion continue his list.
That's the crux of it, really, isn't it? It's how people feel is really ultimately more important than the truth in cases like this. I mean, on paper, there are lots of metrics that do suggest that the world is improving, but if people feel like it's going to hell in a handbasket, that's going to inform their decisions. It's going to inform the kind of governments they elect, inform their behaviour in other ways. So really, the point is, even if the world is getting better, kind of who cares unless people believe it, and how can we make people believe it?
But also that might not be a bad thing. If you believe the world is getting worse and climate change is a terrible thing, you might be more compelled to do something about it. So it's also the way you present some news stories that actually saying everything is terrible.
If you believe that terrorism's getting worse, you might think the answer is to elect a government who aren't going to let any foreigners in.
True, that's the other way of thinking about it. It could go either way. I don't think necessarily. I think if you're really passionate about climate change and thinking that everything is getting really, really worse, then I think that's the right thing to do probably is to let people know that it is a bad thing. You can't really say it's fine, can you?
Yeah. A few months ago, there was this article in The Guardian by Oliver Berkman, who wrote this long read that was really speculating on this exact point, that the world has been reported as if things are getting worse, but actually it may be on a certain number of measures getting better. One of the suggestions that he had was, in response to this, that even if a prevailing sense of optimism did emerge, that actually may help only to stultify matters further. And in fact, what you need is a healthy amount of pessimism mixed with skepticism to continue driving the world forward. Because the minute we start resting on our laurels, then yes, we stop electing governments that are going to affect climate change properly, and we stop trying to fight back against the things that we don't believe in politically, be they Donald Trump or the alternative. So it is important to maintain something of a negativity, according to Berkman at least.
And also, I suppose we get complacent about the fact that the system will self-correct. You can vote for things that feel rebellious. Brexit and Trump are the obvious examples, because that by doing so, the rest of the elite will say, well, the public made a terrible mistake here, but here's what they probably mean, and we'll couch it and we'll make it a little bit not quite what they said, but something a bit like it. And so some people feel confident saying, let's disrupt the apple cart because they know someone else will reset the apple cart.
Yeah, and Berkman addresses that point squarely and says, that we feel as though we can be confident in dealing with whatever political upheavals we throw at not only our societies, but also the world around us, because it's all going to be fundamentally okay. But one of the points that he makes to counter that is that the stakes are now higher. If you put one rogue madman in charge of, say, a nuclear arsenal that could destroy the world many times over,
Why one? Why not take three?
Right.
I can think of at least three.
Sure. But any one of them could do something that has real significant consequences. Therefore, perhaps that pessimistic view is warranted yet again, that we know that the world is threatening. So maybe that underpins our concerns.
Isn't the problem that we're talking about the world at all, Rebecca? I mean, from our position in London especially, people may have felt a shock to the system by Brexit. Essentially, we're still one of the richest countries in the world. Nothing really of any significance in the last 10 years to make our lives better or worse has happened. So when you talk about the world, all it means is someone who previously might have died at 40 might now die at 50. Someone who previously was earning £1.50 a week might now be earning £1.75. The trends are upwards, but the world's still a terrible place.
Well, the thing is that in the developed world, we're consuming an enormous amount of media about what's happening in other places, and we're compared to previous generations, very informed about horrible things happening all over the world. I mean, if you live in a developing country, to you, if there's a falling number of children experiencing polio, that's an enormous change, but obviously here no one thinks about contracting polio at all. So many of these positive trends are happening in the developing world. They're trends, so it's quite hard to kind of quantify them, to look at specific tangible examples that are going to make headlines. It's not the most gripping, we're all guilty of it. We probably wouldn't click on a story about how life expectancy in Botswana has gone up by 2 years or something compared to a story about a terror attack.
Well, even a foiled terror plot.
Yeah.
I click on it, but it is less interesting, sadly, than one that killed 100 people, isn't it? That is just the nature of human interest.
Well, you know what? I think that people generally do think that the world is getting worse. That's a trend we've seen. We've seen polls over the years in the UK, and people always think that crime is on the rise, that everything's getting worse. And I think that the sense that it was steadily getting worse created a kind of cynicism. People didn't really want to react and do anything about it. There was just this general jadedness, which has become, quite fashionable, really. And then the perceived awfulness of things that happened this year, Trump in the US and in this country, Brexit, has energized people, I think, to kind of shake off that cynicism and think, we've got to draw a line under it, things have gotten too bad. And we've seen a big rise of, these alternative opposition movements, the rise of Corbyn, the rise of the anti-Trump brigade in the US. And I think that is something something that's arisen from this perception that everything is going to hell in a handbasket, is that there has been a big counter movement.
Equally, if you voted for Trump or you voted for Brexit, you're probably happy as Larry, really. I think it's a sort of slightly naive viewpoint to say, oh my God, we've got Trump in America, we've got Brexit, everything's going to hell, where a lot of people are saying that's probably a really, really good thing.
But those decisions were driven by, negativity and driven by people thinking that
so if
everything's so awful.
And that's why I think negative reporting can be, or negative things can be a good thing, because if you then voted in Trump and you think he's going to bring some incredible tax reforms in for Christmas to make
Trump
everything
and
better.
Brexit, they were both leaps into the unknown, which suggested that people would rather, take a chance on something unprecedented and a bit wild than continue down the way that things were going before, which is kind of depressing in itself. Although I'm sure some people are actively rejoicing at the prospect of leaving the EU or having Trump in the White House. It seemed like a lot of people who cares how bad it is? It can't be worse than what's happening now.
But even if you take the politics out of it, and I agree that is a question that it really depends on your political viewpoint, whether you regard a conservative or a more liberal government as a better or worse thing. But it is nevertheless important to bear in mind all of those positive trajectories that we kind of mentioned at the top of the show.
Okay, let's just stop theorising for a second. Just on a personal basis, I want to ask you if your personal circumstances have improved in the last, let's say, 3 years. Has the trend been upwards for you, Rebecca?
Broadly, yes. And I haven't contracted polio.
Felicity?
I don't think anything's changed, really.
And Arion?
Yeah, I too have no polio, so positive.
But you had no polio 3 years ago either. I mean, it's difficult because we're all sort of broadly of an age where probably career-wise we'd naturally be earning a little bit more money as the years go on, because we would have started in our early 20s on absolutely nothing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our lives have got better. I mean, I do think this onslaught of negative news in itself makes my life worse.
But more interesting, perhaps? I certainly think it's been a really interesting year as well, as much as there have been concerns along the way. I just think it's been hypnotic. And the amount that I've learnt, both about the US political system and probably the UK and Europe, has been staggering. And I think that the concerns that have arisen, thanks to those two very significant votes, regardless of if you think they're good or bad, have generated interest and probably education, and maybe are going to result in political engagement.
So in a nutshell, Arion, what is the trend, you think, for this year that has been perhaps underreported?
I think the trend is probably that broadly, though the news has felt as though it's worse than ever, in fact, things are getting better.
Yeah, Felicity, it's getting better. Right, your turn. What do you think this year should be remembered for?
2017, I think, was the cure we really needed.
Walking 2 miles to work used to be unthinkable for Jake Omar. He was born with haemophilia A, a genetic defect that means his blood did not clot. The slightest injury used to mean severe bleeding. Even a long stroll would cause bleeding in his joints. But no more.
I think the gene therapy has hopefully given me a bit of a new lease of life. It's going to allow me, as my boys grow up, to be a lot more active with them, to kick footballs around, to climb trees with them, to hopefully run around in the park with them, and not be someone who's got to worry about what I'm doing.
Jake Omar, and before that James Gallagher, reporting for BBC News in December. So actually, Felicity, you are continuing the optimism trend. You want to talk about medicine?
I am slightly. This does follow on from Arion's story quite nicely, in the fact that I think what struck me about 2017 was the number of good news stories there have been, the number of medical advances, medical breakthroughs there have been that will have transformed an awful lot of lives. And actually, I was thinking, apart from the stories that I have researched specifically for this podcast, if someone had asked me to look back on 2017 and say, what was the biggest medical breakthrough, what was the biggest medical story, I would have had absolutely no clue. I couldn't tell you. And I think this is so similar to Arion's point in a way, is that, you would look back on 2017 and talk about Harvey Weinstein or North Korea or Trump, but you wouldn't think to talk about let's talk about Huntington's disease, or let's talk about the male sperm count or something like that. And I think there's so many huge stories with so many totally transformative implications for people's lives that have just completely slipped under the radar. And I'm sort of interested to know why that is.
Okay, well, let's just briefly sort of outline some of those stories then. So Huntington's disease, what was that? I mean, I don't know what the disease is, but what was the story?
Huntington's disease. So this is quite... scientists don't like to talk about a cure, and they certainly haven't found a cure for it, which is quite important to impress. But they have made a huge breakthrough. They're saying it's the biggest breakthrough in 50 years. They found a way to suppress the buildup of harmful proteins in patients suffering from Huntington's disease. They inject a drug, and this sends messengers to very toxic proteins, which means they don't build up. Now, anyone who knows anyone who has Huntington's disease, this is a really awful, debilitating disease that puts you into a vegetative state. You can't do anything. It's something that you can pass on to your children. I mean, it affects people's lives. It is huge what they're doing. We don't know if it's a cure or not. There needs to be more tests, but it is going to probably have massive implications for people. I suppose the one thing about it is that if you saw a headline about Huntington's disease and you don't have it yourself and you don't know anyone who does have it, would you click on it? There's also been a huge breakthrough in haemophilia A. There's been massive breakthroughs in breast cancer and skin cancer. There's been some miracle stories to do with children. A baby whose heart was born outside her body has survived, and a Syrian boy with terrible burns has had this incredible genetically modified skin put on him.
Okay.
There's a lot of good stuff.
I mean, to tie it back in with what Arion was saying a moment ago, perhaps the reason it's slightly underreported is that it is the general trend. You know, the general trend is science is improving, medicine is improving, health is improving, life expectancy is improving. So unless you do suffer from Huntington's disease, you're going to think, oh, that's good, isn't it? That's scientists doing their jobs. No news there.
Yes and no. I mean, we've actually...
I'm not saying I think that.
Yeah. We've actually found that the medical stories that we have done tend to get quite a lot of traffic, a surprising amount of traffic, and particularly stuff that takes on matters that affect a lot of people and are of broad concern. For example, we had a briefing on depression, its causes, its potential treatments, and what you can do for friends and family, particularly who may be suffering from depression. And I think that people are interested because the minute we get a cure for something, or at least a vaccine or something that you know, a positive reaction, people lose interest. That's why we're not so interested in smallpox and measles as we once were. But I think that cancer remains a great matter of concern for a great many people whose life hasn't been touched by it these days.
But is this year better in that sense than last year?
Do you know what? In particular, in relation to cancer, I feel as though it has been. And right at the beginning, when that treatment for breast cancer came out, that seemed to have really staggering results. I think it was this trial found that 11 women on a trial of something like 20 women had seen the cancer reduce almost entirely, and it felt as though it was going to be a breakthrough. Cancer, of course, is a whole lot of different diseases that all have a similar kind of activity. So you can only treat them one by one. But that seemed really phenomenal. And to me, at least, that this year was significant.
Except they mutate, don't they? And they resist drugs and things. Things change. So, you know, we've seen this with antibiotics, haven't we, Rebecca? You know, what might actually seem like a breakthrough in 50 years might not be working anymore.
Yeah, because, I mean, I think what's at the crux of this topic in particular and why it's maybe been underreported is that medicine advances in increments. I mean, we have seen some really big breakthroughs, like the Huntington's one was huge. And it was a breakthrough big enough that the average person can understand it and can kind of appreciate the significance. But medicine advances, you know, so slowly. Like the bottom line of the Huntington's thing was it's not a cure, and that they have to go into the next stage of testing, next stage of research. And by the time that actually comes in, you know, hopefully it does come in as a treatment for people with Huntington's, we're not going to remember that original story. And it's hard for us to see it as a trend. Like the thing, as you were saying about cancer earlier, Arion, is that I saw an article a couple of months ago that was looking at how the life expectancy of people with cancer has changed over the past, I think it was since the 1980s. And it has, like, the rate of curing cancer successfully has gone up massively, but we don't think about it because there was no one moment where someone said, this is the drug, this is the treatment. It's just a series of small breakthroughs that we just don't follow.
No, and you take AIDS as another fascinating example in a very similar way. Now, AIDS feels so much less concerning than it once did, thanks to years and years of small incremental breakthroughs and successes. But was there a year where people went, oh, right, we've dealt with AIDS? Not exactly, but now it feels like less of a problem, and hopefully
in the West. Worth underlining.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
But the treatments have a trickle down and they feel as though they're going to spread. And maybe that's going to be the same way that cancer gets dealt with, not all at once, not with a sort of, well, now we'll just stop cancer in everyone.
That may be, might it not, because of the way it's reported. And this goes to something that Felicity was hinting at earlier. You know, why wouldn't you click on a link about a groundbreaking therapy? It might be because actually, far from it being underreported, there are so many quasi-science stories, they're on the front of the Daily Express every day, where, you know, one university has found a minor thing and then put a press release out about it, and people have slight fatigue. You know, red wine's good, butter's bad, can't remember, changed it, this sweetener's good, this one gives you cancer. And actually, when a real science story happens, it's like, oh, it's another one of those weird science stories, whatever.
Yeah, I think the reporting of health stories in general is really dangerous and something that journalism needs to get a grip on pretty fast, actually. And I think the problem is to do with a lot of outlets won't have a dedicated health reporter who actually knows their stuff inside out. I think you have editors who will change the headline to make it look more sexy and sensationalist and get the whole thing totally wrong. And I think probably at the heart of it, you have scientists and journalists who are like diametrically opposed in terms of what they're trying to achieve. I think scientists are understandably incredibly cautious about any potential breakthroughs they're making. If there's anything that they've done slightly wrong, they're going to be trying to cover themselves massively. Whereas journalists, I think they just want to go in with the big headline and say cures and everything's great, or, you know, conversely, everything's bad. But one story this year, which was actually really, really scary, and I think has also kind of flown under the radar a little bit, was the global sperm count has showed a 50% drop in the past 40 years.
Not on this show, covered on this show.
Yeah. And it's falling by an average of just over a percentage point a year. And some people have sort of said, oh my God, humanity could soon become extinct. It's not that bad, but it is a serious story. But I think the problem with it was that there was a sort of reluctance from some scientists on how to deal with this story, because previous studies of this have been criticised, saying the decline could be down to other methods, sort of changing laboratory methods or not taking into account certain things. So I think there's that wariness with scientists that they don't want to go the whole hog and say, you know, there has been a breakthrough and something's marvelous, when actually that might not be the case. Whereas I think journalists are always sort of pushing scientists, you know, like when are we going to have a treatment, when are we going to have a cure, is it the next 6 months? And I think scientists saying, you know, 25 years maybe for gene therapy.
That's the thing, isn't it? Is I think I think I agree with Felicity broadly that this has been an amazing year for medical breakthroughs, but it's really something that we're only going to appreciate in retrospect. So we'll have to come back in 10 years and talk about whether or not those cures came.
Well, that's a very convenient get out, isn't it? You know, we're all going to come up with trends that we can verify on the Year Unwrapped 2027. It will happen. I'll make it happen. Rebecca, I hope that your story of the year is going to be one we can tangibly say you've got right or wrong.
Is this the year that the big studios became islands in the stream?
Disney right now is looking at a big winter coming, and it's in the form of Netflix, it's in the form of Amazon, and it's even probably going to be in the form of Apple. These guys are going to be willing to spend billions of dollars a year in creating content that they can give to digital consumers on demand. And so Disney, already the biggest conventional Hollywood studio, says, let's ramp up. Let's get the TV studios of Fox. Let's get the movie studios of Fox. Let's get their back catalog. Let's get their executives who have the know-how in Los Angeles, and let's really do that.
NPR's David Falkenflik talking to PBS NewsHour in December, just after Rupert Murdoch sold 21st Century Fox to the Disney Corporation. Rebecca, why is this your story of the year?
Well, people have been talking for a few years now about, are the streaming services going to displace traditional TV and movie studios? And so far, it's kind of been more think piece fodder. You know, lots of articles have been written saying, you know, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Are millennials going to cut their cords, etc.? But we haven't really seen that much tangible evidence of this happening. I think the Disney-Fox merger has been, for me, the first major sign that the traditional studios are extremely worried about the encroachment of the streaming platforms and are making radical changes.
How do you put those two things together? Because this is an old Hollywood studio buying another old Hollywood studio. What's it got to do with Netflix?
So the general consensus is that lots of studios, and in this case Fox, are kind of coming to the conclusion that they can no longer afford to compete as individuals with the likes of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, in addition to their traditional old rivals. And so Rupert Murdoch has essentially decided that it's better to just cut ties with what Disney's bought is basically the TV and film production side of Fox. So Fox is going to keep its sports network, its news network, and its, you know, TV channel. It just won't be making the content itself.
It's buying intellectual property, basically. It's buying The Simpsons, X-Men.
Yeah, Simpsons, Alien.
But so what? What's that got to do with streaming? Is the idea that they'll build a rival to Netflix?
Well, yes, and this does actually unlock a lot of ways for Disney to do that. Beyond the fact that they're eating up one of their old rivals, it's going to give them a majority share in Hulu, which currently is part owned by Fox and now will be majority owned by Disney, who already had a stake in it too.
No, we don't have Hulu in the UK, but Arion, you're nodding along. Do they have it in Australia, Hulu?
No, I think it's just
in the
Asia
States.
And the States.
So, but that is basically a Netflix rival that might be going global soon, right?
It is. It's not as big as Netflix, even in the States, but yeah, it's a big rival streaming service.
Yeah, and Hulu were the ones who made The Handmaid's Tale, which was kind of the talked about TV series of 2017.
Won an Emmy, didn't it?
Yeah, and also, I think it won a few Emmys. And this actually brings me on to just broadening it out a bit, which is that Netflix won its first Oscar this year for Best Short Feature for a documentary about the White Helmets in Syria, which was a huge development. And it's just, I think these are all part of a series of change. I think the Disney-Fox merger was the big one, but so many other things have happened this year that kind of reinforce my perception that maybe we will look back on this as the year that we started to see these major changes in the way that Hollywood runs.
Felicity.
Yeah, when I look back on 2017, I was actually struck by the number of really high quality TV series that I have watched on streaming sites. I do think this has been the year for really great original high quality shows. Like, it's undeniable. I mean, like The Crown was really great. The Handmaid's Tale was brilliant. There was so much stuff.
Yeah, and also just anecdotally, I feel as though in previous years you might have asked your friends, do you have Netflix? Because I just watched this really great show on Netflix. Whereas now you can almost take it as read that everyone's got it. So like, oh yeah, you should watch this show.
And I think I've been to the cinema maybe 4 or 5 times this year, which is, in previous years I would definitely have gone, I don't know, maybe a dozen times, 20 times. And it just doesn't feel so, I don't know, it feels like there's so much on offer now, just through streaming platforms. And, we have seen Netflix particularly, but, also Amazon Prime, etc., expanding out into these proper feature-length, blockbuster-style films. So on the 22nd of December, Netflix released Bright, which stars Will Smith, and it's kind of an action buddy comedy, full scale. I think it cost something like $90 million to make. So they are really moving in towards, not just quirky indie comedies that they can make cheaply, etc. They've really put their cards on the table, and they are going after the big bucks with blockbusters.
And presumably then the idea is, if the Disney Fox material ends up on Hulu, or if Hulu becomes rebranded as something else, but anyway, they'll have an online platform. Presumably the idea is, with all that intellectual property, they are future-proofed because they have Independence Day style box office movies. They have Star Wars. They have X-Men, as I said earlier. So they have all these brands that get people to go to the cinema. They have Marvel, don't they? So they have all these ways that people currently spend money on movies is enshrined in a digital future for that company.
And the other thing that they have now is both Sky Sports and Star Sports. Fox held on to Fox Sports, but it's consolidating Disney's ownership of some sports broadcasting, at least within the States, and probably that's going to sort of emerge around the world as well. But I think that another thing we've seen change is that shows don't broadcast at a time. We don't have this sort of, you've got to be watching your television set at 9 o'clock on a Friday night to catch the latest episode of whatever it is. And that is a major shift now, I think, with the way that we consume entertainment. But sport is probably going to be one of the very few time-sensitive properties that you have to watch it live. I mean, it just isn't the same if you watch a football match the next day. So Disney is also future-proofing itself in that sense.
But is this consolidation actually good? I mean, one of the things, Felicity, about the internet and internet streaming and downloading and, hey, we're doing it now, we're making a podcast, one of the good things about it 10 years ago, or a thing that people were optimistic about, was this is a way for people, entry-level people, bedroom bloggers, all of that stuff. They're going to make their own content and they'll be on the same platform. Be on the same platform as Rupert Murdoch and Disney. And actually what's happening is all these companies are consolidating and you'll end up with the same 5 companies running everything again. If it hasn't actually been featured by Apple or Google or Disney, no one will see it.
Possibly, but I think I'm still struck by how much good quality stuff there is. And I think any sort of competition in that area, I think the pressure on 21st Century Fox is a good thing, if anything, because I think it shows how much good stuff there is out there. But the thing that I think is negative, that I would pick up on Arion's point, the fact that you no longer have to sit down and tune into whatever at 9 o'clock, is our sort of the way we consume culture is changing. And I think the idea that we binge a series and stay up all night to watch 20 episodes or something in one go, that's got to have really concerning implications down the line. And I find that slightly...
What are those concerning implications exactly?
Well, there
Spell them out.
I mean, if you're staying up all night, like kids, I think in terms of like mental health, I think that it is really disturbing, I think, to just watch everything in one go. It must be having some sort of negative impact.
But I used to watch 6 hours of telly in a go. It would just be, Channel 4's Friday night schedule. Now I get to choose. I'm still spending just as long in front of the telly, aren't I?
I read an article that said that it's having a negative impact on people's sex life. I don't know if there's anything to that, but maybe people are now taking their time and watching.
I can correlate that. Oh no, we had a child at the same time. Yeah. Same time we got Netflix.
So just to touch off actually of what you were saying about kids, one of the things we covered this year on the podcast was the Elsagate thing, which was about all the inappropriate content on YouTube that kids were seeing.
I can't believe you're opening that can of worms again. It took 20 minutes just
Don't
to explain
worry, I'm not going to delve into describing the videos at length again. But one of the things that emerged from that surprised me, kind of the side angle on that story, was the fact that for a lot of young kids, YouTube and streaming platforms are TV. They are not being indoctrinated, as a loaded word, but they are not being indoctrinated into the viewing patterns that we all and previous generations, this is probably the third or fourth generation of people who've grown up watching TV, and this new generation coming up are not picking up those traditional viewing patterns at all. So there's no reason for them to ever go to broadcast television because they're just not experiencing it, even from their early years.
But coming back to that point about whether Disney's ownership of all of those incredible properties is a good thing or a bad thing, there was that moment when George Lucas came out just after Star Wars was purchased by Disney and that whole franchise, and pretty much implied that a Darth Vader-like lord had taken control of his beloved baby. And he then sort of tucked his head in because he'd just made $1 billion, and we didn't hear from him again on that topic. But I think that there is a concern that we're going to see a Disneyfication of some of those properties that we have known and loved for over the years broadly. And I mean, have the Star Wars movies under Disney been that great?
They've been good
just
compared to
introduce a minor topic at the end of the podcast here.
They've been good compared to the early 2000s trilogy, surely. But
no. Rotten Tomatoes has put the latest one lower than The Phantom Menace.
That's astounding.
Yep.
But the thing is now is that Disney, still don't know if this Disney-Fox merger will actually be approved, because some people suggested it might be blocked because it's going to give Disney too much of a monopoly, which it would. It would give them control over 40% of US box office.
But I mean, Disney already has a quasi-monopoly. They own everything, it feels like.
The broad point I've heard made against the whole idea that this is going to put Disney in control is that the idea is that merging Disney and Fox is going to enable them to challenge the streaming services. But actually, I think they might inadvertently be speeding up their own irrelevance, because if there is a monopoly in the traditional media producers, they're not going to be competing with each other. They're not going to be putting out the kind of diverse, challenging, intriguing content, which is what made the streaming platforms so popular in the first place.
Okay, you've made a good argument. I think that is a big story of the year. However, can I just finish on this controversial thought? It seems to me that actually this year has not been as significant in terms of our news cycle and our lives as last year. That actually most of the things you're talking about you could have seen coming last year, and you're still talking about the shadow of Brexit and Trump, which kind of was last year.
That's actually our point, though.
Is it? Oh,
yeah,
you're right.
That's actually our point, Ollie.
Yeah.
A thing that's kept coming up in this conversation is, we'll have to wait and see what the impact is. And I think that is probably true. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about, the seeds were sown last year. But that's kind of the point in a way, is that you have to look back.
So was this the year we decided that last year was when the world changed?
Yeah, tune in next year so you can hear about what happened this year.
Yeah, tune in next year, we'll have more evidence about why 2016 was bad. That is it from this edition of The Year Unwrapped. My thanks to Rebecca Gillie, Felicity Capon and Arion McNicoll. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk? You can also sign up there to our free email newsletter, The Weekday. Or, of course, you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. And if this review of the year has encouraged you to look back through the last 52 weeks of The Week Unwrapped content, I'm not going to discourage you from doing that. They're all available on our podcast feed, and they're still very timely. That's how we design the show. You're welcome. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.